Welcome to Scrolling to Death. I'm Nikki, and today I'm joined by Dr. Alison Yeung. Hi, Dr. Yeung. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I've been excited to chat with you.
Me too. So I know that you are a family physician practicing for over a decade. You're a mom of two. You run an Instagram account at the Smartphone Effect, where we got connected and are sharing similar content, all in the space of educating people on the impact of social media on mental health and screens and all the things. So, what else? What else can I learn about you? Can you tell me more about you?
As a person or in this space?
Yeah, as a person.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I'm pretty regular, honestly. I have a 5.5-year-old and a 2-year-old that keep me busy most of the time. Um, I have a practice that keeps me busy. I have about 1,200 or so patients. Um,
Wow.
yeah, that takes up a lot of time. And then um, I scaled back a little bit after I had my daughter because I
Mm-hmm.
just felt like I needed some me time to do all this.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then of course I got some me time and then like got into this space and really just felt quite passionate about it. And putting the word out there. So now I feel like when I do have extra time, I try to like exercise and things like that, but I'm also just always reading research and trying to spit that back out to parents to educate. So yeah, I'm busy, but I'm pretty regular.
Yeah. 1,200 patients is a lot of patients. What's the age ranges? Is it all the way from kids to adults?
Yeah, so in I don't know how it is in the States. Like in Canada, especially where we're from,
Mm-hmm.
um, you care for all the ages, and we do
Okay.
most like primary care, pediatrics, and things like that. So I see a lot of kids and teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
and have access to psychiatrists or psychologists readily or quickly. So we end
Mm-hmm.
up managing a lot of sometimes pretty complex mental health ourselves as well. So you just kind of learn the skill set as you go along.
Yeah. So, well, you said one thing. So you've been reading up on research, and I feel like once you know how screens and social media is affecting kids, it's sort of hard to turn away from. And that's something that I got really passionate about too, and what turned me on to do what I'm doing, which is not, and I left like a full career like to do this because there's no turning back, right? It's like once you know, you feel like everyone should know these things, right?
Totally. And I find like I have to sometimes sort of catch myself in interactions and things because I think sometimes, I know more about how the screens and the devices might be affecting kids and parents as well. But you try not to make the visit all about that because you also have to catch them in a moment where they're ready to hear it and you can kind of fit it in so that it's not a, you know, defensive encounter. And so
Hmm.
it's been a lot of nuance because now I'm always thinking like, well, what about screens and what about this? And
Hmm.
I have to I have to keep myself well rounded in my questioning.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it does come down to that because what are we doing more than that? Nothing. I mean, we're looking at our phones and our screens and social media more than like most of our waking hours, right?
Exactly. And one thing I wanted to say to you too is like I've never had a parent, a child, a teenager. No one has ever come in saying, like, my child is struggling or I am struggling, and I think it's because of devices. That's never happened.
Wow.
So I think if you talk about it and it comes up, then everyone will, of course, then says, yeah, for sure it has something to do with it. But I
Hmm.
don't think people still quite gauge like how big of an impact it's having on their mental health.
Yeah, and I just wonder why that is. I had one friend, we were on a hike the other day and I was talking about some of these things and she's like, "I have never heard any of this before you started doing your podcast. In my news feed, like my Apple news feed, I don't get any information when there's a lawsuit against Snap because kids have died or like that more kids are depressed than ever and dying by suicide more than ever. Like that's just not in people's mainstream news feeds."
I know, which is great. And I think because you and I are in it and that those are the people we follow on that account and that's all the content we're getting, like
Hmm.
I often think, how does everybody not know these things? Because it's all that we're seeing.
Hmm.
but yeah, I think people are aware in a general sense, but they're just not aware of how dangerous and how deep this gets.
Yeah, and I mean, it's even hard sometimes for me to find. I find a lot of this updated information on LinkedIn actually because I've just gotten connected with a lot of parent survivors, so parents whose kids have died by suicide or died from an overdose or something related to a social media harm. And then a lot of the attorneys that represent them and just a lot of people in the space. So LinkedIn's been really good for like me learning about these things, but as far as on regular news feeds, I have to search for the term social media to get, and then you get all these like lighthearted celebrity things, but then you also can find some of the other studies. So I just like to start us off, recommend that people, if they're on Instagram, follow accounts like ours just to get that well rounded data and research and stories from people who have been affected negatively. Because I think it can get drowned out. And also, if you're going to let your kids on Instagram or social media, have them follow our accounts too. Um, age appropriately, I would
Yeah.
say kid, you know, I don't know if a 13-year-old wants to be, I don't know. Like, I think 13-year-olds should know that there are kids that are getting negatively affected and
Yeah,
sometimes hurt.
the some parents that follow me in my practice 'cause it comes up and I tell them about it, and some
Mm-hmm.
of the kids follow and they tell me like they see your stuff, and I mean I don't know what they really think or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is good for them to see for sure. Might not
Yeah.
fully those ages, but it something will get in, right?
Yeah. I think the earlier we start talking about it with kids, even my 8-year-old, she knows that I have a podcast. She knows it's about social media and how it can be harmful. And so I've started introducing lightly some of these topics. And I think that it can start that young, age appropriately, right? So your boots on the ground, right? You are seeing, would you say, like 1,200 patients, a lot of younger people. And so at a baseline, like before we get into how it's affecting them, what age generally are you seeing kids that have smartphones in their hands?
Oh God. Um so young. Yeah, like I feel like by the time they're 8, 9, 10, a lot of them do already. And they'll be on it when I come into the room. It's going to become my new biggest pet peeve, but they'll be on it, in one moment of boredom in the office when I walk in, and then they may or may not put it away right away. But it's definitely young, and by the time
Mm-hmm.
they're teenagers, they all have it, and they have it out in the room, and it's visible.
Okay. I was just talking with a neuroscientist yesterday called, his name is Dr. Not yesterday, I was editing it yesterday, Dr. Carl Marcy. And he was talking about the importance of boredom. And it reminds me, like, remember when, I just remember before phones and you would sit in a doctor's office and it would seem like a million years and they would have magazines or something, or you would like study the pictures on the walls or whatever. But like that's so important, don't you think, to just be bored and not, I'm like an 8-year-old doesn't need something to pass the time in a room.
I know. And I think when the kids are that young, and even like I'll see obviously babies and 2 year olds on the phone as well, watching a video. And I think part of it comes from the parents not wanting their child to be disruptive, or like not an embarrassment, but they want to make sure their kid stays calm and well behaved during their
Mm-hmm.
encounter. Maybe it's for their appointment or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I like it's okay. They can run around. Like I'm not bothered.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll sign up or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that I think you should. It's that important. Okay, so you're seeing kids with phones in your practice like at 8, 9, and 10 years old, like their own phones.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about social media? Maybe that's harder for you to be able to tell, but from what your questionnaires and what you're asking patients, when are kids getting social media access?
So they're all, I mean, I would say 95% are on by the time they're in high school. I've done some
Hmm.
talks too, and I'll ask parents like by a raise of hands. And, there's always one or two that their kids aren't yet. But so 95%, I would say, by high school are on social media.
Okay,
And
and that's like
7 and 8.
14. Okay. Okay. So, I imagine over time it's become more and more obvious that this usage at younger ages is a problem. But do you remember back when do you have any aha moments with a specific case or patient that you were like, okay, this is a problem, I think, and this is getting dangerous?
I think for me, it was, we've all been aware that there have been increases in mental health visits coming for years. Like I've been practicing now for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my colleagues and I have all been aware of it, and we've talked about it. And we're like, is this just kids these days? Like, what's up with these kids? They seem um, so struggling so much from a mental health perspective. And I think it was when I came back from my second mat leave, which would have been in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously, things didn't get better over COVID, so there was more visits after that. But I started seeing more and more kids that were coming in being started on medications for whatever it would be, depression, anxiety, ADHD, because they checked all the boxes, they fit the criteria. But I was seeing kids that would be on one, two, three medications. We'd be switching medications, and they would just come back and consistently not better, never better, no better. And that's not typically what you would see, right? You
Mm-hmm.
would see a response. Oh, I was like, what is going on? So um, I think the aha moment for me was I started asking the kids the same questions. And I said, what do you do for fun? What brings you joy? Are you in any extracurricular activities? And
Mm-hmm.
I realized that over and over again, I was getting the same response where they would just kind of look at me and because the phone's always out in the room, they would like notion
Mm-hmm.
to their phone, say, I don't know, I just go on my phone, or I just go on YouTube, or I just play video games. And it was like this, it just kept happening. So
Mm-hmm.
that was for me when I was like, okay, I need to look into this. And when I started going into the research, I started telling my colleagues, like, this is a thing and this is a bad thing. Um, so I just felt like I had to speak out about it. I just felt like there was no choice because it seemed like parents weren't really making the connection, which I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it for me.
Why don't parents make the connection, do you think?
I feel because it's so ubiquitous for everybody now and it's so entrenched in our everyday worlds that they just sort of feel like this is what it is. And they
Mm-hmm.
feel like this must just be teenagers these days and this is what they do. And because all of their friends are going through similar things, that
Mm-hmm.
just the way of the world. That's my best guess.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I think the lack of education, right? I don't think that they are aware of all the studies that show that mental health has become so much worse since the onset of smartphones and everyday life. Like people just don't know that stuff, or they
Yeah.
in a lot of ways still, right?
Yeah. Um, I think one thing that's been helpful for me, and I hope is helpful for parents, is understanding how screens and screen use is affecting their brains and their brain development. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Now, their brains are developing so much through adolescence, right? And that prefrontal cortex is fully developed in their mid 20s. Um, and the screen really blocks the ability for the brain to appropriately develop. There's an interview coming soon. I mentioned Dr. Carl Marcy, and he talks about the importance of face to face connections in wiring the brain correctly, and that the screen time obviously blocks you from having face to face connections between parent and child. But you did a really good breakdown on Instagram about how dopamine works. And I think that that might be helpful if you can give us like a quick rundown of what's happening within our kids' brains when they access devices and related to dopamine and what we kind of should know from our like non-scientific level.
Yeah, like I think most people are familiar with dopamine and the idea that it motivates us to do things that we think will give us pleasure. I think most people are familiar with this idea that you said about the prefrontal cortex, and that's what's different in children is that this area of the brain that's responsible for decision making and insight. Judgment and in a lot of ways your personality and your ability to socialize.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fully formed until your mid 20s, and I just wonder if that's even going to change over time. Like if we're not exercising those muscles, so to speak, are we also not going to develop that part of our brain until later in life? I don't know. Remains to
Mm,
be seen.
yeah.
Um, but so what's happening with the dopamine is we all have a baseline level of dopamine, and that is going to give us the motivation to get up in the morning and have a shower, feed ourselves, keep us alive, basically. Every time that we experience something that we think might give us pleasure or that gives us pleasure, we get a spike in dopamine and we like how that feels. But what people may not know is that after you get a spike, you get this compensatory drop in dopamine. And that's because we have to keep homeostasis within our body to get back to that same baseline. So when you get a drop, that's when you'll find that you're starting to have cravings to seek out that pleasurable experience again. As it relates to kids and social media, if you imagine that kids are on their phones based on one study for a median of 4.5 hours a day. So half of kids are more than that.
Hmm.
And 9.5 hours a day on screens in general. You can imagine how many peaks and drops in dopamine that we're getting every single day. It's just nonstop. So, one way I heard it described, which I really like, is our dopamine receptors like to be tickled, but they don't like to be bludgeoned. So, when you're constantly getting these spikes in dopamine, what happens is the receptors for the dopamine actually start to downregulate themselves or turn off. And then, in more severe cases of addiction, they actually start to die. So, what happens first is that you're going to see this drop in your baseline of dopamine. And what you're going to see from kids is that they're no longer motivated or driven to do things that otherwise previously would have brought them joy. So you'll start to see, I don't want to go to school. That's a huge one. I don't want to go see my friends. I don't want to hang out with my parents. They just want to be on their devices because that's what's giving them those big peaks of dopamine. And then over time, as that baseline continues to drop and those receptors continue to downregulate, they are no longer even going to get pleasure from being on their devices themselves, but they keep trying to get that peak back. So they keep trying to go back and play more. And that's when you really get into the addiction. And we know that anybody who is truly addicted to any substance is not happy because of it.
Right.
So this is a behavioral addiction. It's a little bit different than substance addictions, but the same premise.
Hmm.
And so that's when you start to see the real like isolation and the loneliness and the depression and all those other factors being affected.
Yeah. And parents can help their children to not experiencing this by how, like, what is a couple of tips just based off of this dopamine discussion?
Yeah, so a couple of simple tips. You're trying to keep in mind that you want to bring their baseline back up. So they need meaningful breaks in their use throughout the day. So the three big ones that I could say, number one would be school. They're at school for the majority of their day, so we need schools to step up and give meaningful cell phone policies in school that are forced and implemented.
Hmm.
Parents could also choose not to send a phone to
Hmm.
school with their children. That would be great.
Yeah.
Um, and I know there's differing opinions on the school policies. I personally feel the longer of a consistent break they can get during the day, the better. Some schools will have it, not during class, but you can run right to your locker in between classes and get back on the phone. And then, like, I feel like if we think about it from this dopamine perspective and getting the baseline back up, the longer the break, the better. So I think if there's no phones allowed during school hours, that would be the best policy. And I
Hmm.
think anecdotally too, like the longer that we're away from our phones, some will argue it makes the craving stronger to go back. I don't think that's true. I think the
Hmm.
opposite is true.
Hmm.
Um, so that's my take on that. So school, and then tech downtime within your day as a family. So saying we're going to have a break at dinner, we're going to have a break an hour before bedtime, we're going to have no phones on Sundays, we're going to, whatever that may be within your own family can
Mm-hmm.
really enforce those breaks. And then sleep is the other massive one that, kids are not sleeping and they should not have phones in their bedroom overnight. That should be a non-negotiable. So
Mm-hmm.
there's those three things. What I've read in a lot of the studies is that problems with mental health tend to start becoming much more relevant after kids have been on social media or video games for two or more hours.
Okay.
So I think if there can be a goal in place to limit that usage to 2 hours or less a day, and I would say like combine video games and social media,
Yeah.
that's like the holy grail for a teenager. Keeping in mind that most of them are already on their phones for at least an hour a day during the school day.
Yeah.
So there's that way to bring up your dopamine, and then the other thing is not to layer dopamine enhancing activities. So an easy example of this would be if you go out for a walk, don't take your phone with you, because as soon as you have the dopamine effects from the phone and the dopamine effects from the walk, the phone is going to give you a bigger peak of dopamine, and it's going to naturally make that walk feel less pleasurable.
Mm-hmm.
So can detach the two, you will enjoy your walk more, and then that'll increase motivation to do those non-screen activities later as well.
Yeah. Even using a second screen. So, like watching a TV show or a movie with your kids and then also having your phone in your hand, like that.
Yes,
Sometimes I catch myself and I'm like, this is insane that I'm not stimulated enough by one screen, that I have to have another one. It's crazy.
I know. And I always go back to like it's so hard for adults. We have such a hard time with it. And so we have to stop, assuming that our kids could handle the same things that we can, because it's
Yeah.
just can't imagine having a little person's brain and experiencing what they are now.
Yeah. We're fully developed in our prefrontal cortex and we still give in to the impulses to grab our phone when we shouldn't. So you mentioned sleep. And one thing I heard recently that was shocking was Amy Neville is a mom. Her son Alexander died. He bought a oxy pill on through Snapchat, and he took it and had fentanyl, and he died. And he was 14. And so she did an interview with me. She goes around and gives educational sessions in schools and to groups of children and adults. But she was doing an educational session for kindergartners, and she asked them, well, she found out that a lot of them were being given tablets at home. And she shared with me that their parents, that a lot of these kindergartners were using those tablets during bedtime. And their parents were telling them, just watch something until you fall asleep.
Ugh,
And I died inside. And I know instinctively that this is just terrible, but like, tell me what your reaction is to that.
yeah, that is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
Kindergartners.
yeah, again, I think probably multifactorial in the sense that parents don't understand how harmful that is. There's this notion that calm screens calm kids, right? And I think if you aren't educated to know that that's a short-term fix that actually has longer-term behavioral issues,
Mm-hmm.
then you might just keep doing that. I think it's also I cite a lot like we're living in a different time where we have dual working households often, like
Mm-hmm.
parents are busy, they're stressed out themselves in their work or personal lives, and
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to give that so that you don't have to do that bedtime routine, I guess. So I think it's a reflection of just first world issues,
Mm-hmm.
that it could be argued that all this screen stuff that we talk about with kids, like it's a parenting issue, not really a kid issue. But I
Yeah.
think that we're given screens that much at that young, I just keep calling it this slippery slope. Like it sets the stage for them to be the kids that are going to get a phone in their hand at age 5 and get on social media. And like, that's just the natural progression. So if you're not aware of it at that age, it's dangerous.
And what is that going to look like when they're in their 20s and 30s? Like, how can this overuse of screens affect them as they get into adulthood?
Yeah. So I think kids these days are really using screens as a coping mechanism for any uncomfortable feelings. And so, if they feel anxious about something, if they feel down about something, it's a lot easier to grab a phone or a tablet and watch something, or put your headphones on and listen to music instead of tackling the issue. And I think if parents aren't helping to facilitate those interactions, well, how do they know any better?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's this slippery slope to then you have adults that cannot cope with any emotions. They can't cope with handing things in on time. I mean, we see this in the education system where my husband's a high school teacher, and he struggles because they there's not even deadlines anymore. Like the school system has kind of accommodated that.
Mm.
So there's just this lack of coping and meeting deadlines, which then translates into you get a job, and are you going to be able to attend your job?
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah.
Is there an increase in ADHD or ADHD like symptoms?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually I had a statistic on it. It was a Canadian statistic, but the like even the number of prescriptions have gone up like 30 or 40% in the
Mm-hmm.
last decade within Ontario. So, we're prescribing more, people are presenting more. You can
Mm-hmm.
now get stimulants from like video clinics online where you just
Right. Yep.
check the boxes and you get the prescription. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think unless practitioners are digging deeper about why the symptoms are coming up now, or why are they worse now, what can we do to try to remedy things without medication first, it's
Mm-hmm.
just it keeps getting everything that's getting medicated.
Right. Okay. So, $1 million question. When should we let our kids or teens have a phone? And then, like, what type of phone would you recommend?
Yeah, so I think the top two reasons that parents give their kids a phone is number one, safety, and number two, peer pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like if we look at the safety perspective, um, I would argue that the vast majority of kids in elementary school don't need a phone. You generally know where they are all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a mom in the other day, which did give me a different perspective in terms of she's separated from her partner, and so there's a lot of conflict over phones, and one parent having different opinions, and
Mm-hmm.
the dad wants the child to have their own phone because he doesn't want to have to go through the mom to get a hold of his kids. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's always nuance and exceptions to these
Sure.
things. When it comes to safety, I would say generally when the child is starting to stay at home alone because we don't have landlines anymore, or I've heard parents say like if they're going to be at sporting events for many hours without their parents, you want to be able to get a hold of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in those cases, I think it's reasonable to get a phone, and I don't think any child should start with a smartphone. They should get a dumb phone, talk and text only. In the States there, you guys are luckier than we are because you have access to some of the child safe phones like Bark and TrueMe and all those things that we don't as of yet really have access to. But that's a
Mm-hmm.
really good idea because they also screen for dangerous content
Yep.
once they social media. But so yeah, dumb phone. And then I just encourage parents, like if it's the giving in because of the peer pressure, be creative for as long as you can. Like if they want to be able to video talk with their friends, can they do that on the family desktop or the
Mm-hmm.
iPad or your phone?
Right.
Can like there's a lot of ways that you can get away with not giving them their own device that they have access to all the time, because
Mm-hmm.
again, it's just a slippery slope. Once you give it, you can't go back.
Yeah. And I take issue with what we're calling these phones that are more stripped down. So yeah, they're called dumb phones, which is not like a
Yeah,
something you
great name.
want, you know? And then they're
I,
kid and then the kid safe phone. So all those come I appreciate Bark and Trumi and Pinwheel and all these companies for making phones that are stripped down and safer for teenagers, but when they call them kid safe and they've some of them have, trademarked similar terms, I just take issue with that too. Like we're just telling parents that your kid needs this phone. Well, most kids don't need a phone. Maybe we should
I,
call it teen safe. I don't know.
yeah, honestly, I have the exact same feeling about as you about that. And I feel like, again, I keep saying this slippery slope thing, but that, I mean, those phones have social media capabilities, right? That's the next step. So again, once you give that phone, social media is just another step away. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I always kind of caution people on um, buying into this idea of an idea that a business is selling you. Like, I
Yeah.
also take issue with for example, I just posted something today about one of the school districts around us is looking at a cell phone ban. And there was an article written, and someone was saying, this is not the effective way to do it. We just need to teach kids how to use the phones responsibly. Well, this guy comes from a company that sells that option to school boards. So it's like,
Oh my
if there's,
God.
of course, you're going to push that agenda, but I don't feel that that should be a substitute to a cell phone policy. Sure, do it in addition,
Mm-hmm.
but don't do it instead of a policy. Like, that stuff drives me nuts.
Yeah. And the phones in schools, that whole topic. I have one post on Instagram. You may have seen that's at like 4.5 million views.
Yeah.
And it's just like every day there's tons of more comments and views on that post. And I don't really
Yeah.
know what to do with that because I agree that children should not have their phones in schools, but some of these parents are so pissed off about it. There's so many varying opinions on it. And it's just such a layered, like right now, I just feel like I'm struggling with my kids' devices in their schools and being given iPads in kindergarten that have adult YouTube access on them. Like, what are we doing? And if I can't even control it in my own kid's school, then like, I don't know where to start.
True. And I think, again, like that argument, the parents that are against it, there's
Mm-hmm.
two common things, right? Well, one in Canada, but two in
Yeah.
the States is, how am I going to get a hold of my child? Which teachers have told me time and time again, like, your children are safe. They can contact you whenever they want to. You can contact them whenever, like, there's phones in every classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's not really it's not a great argument. And then, yeah, of course, in the States, there's the concern about the school shootings, but yeah, I just think it's, yeah.
And yeah, with the school shootings, a high school teacher I interviewed was like, it's actually unsafe to have all the kids get their phones out in an emergency because there will be noises coming from the phones. It doesn't keep the kids as safe as possible to have their devices in their hand. I understand a parent sitting at home realizing this is happening and not being able to get a hold of their kid and make sure their kid is okay.
Yeah.
But if the phone is causing them to be in more danger, then is that what we want over hearing from them? I don't know. It's
Well, and
tricky.
like, if we already know that a child having a phone in their backpack or on their desk is more detrimental to learning than
Mhm.
having a phone in their locker, then even if you're not putting a ban in place and the child is allowed to bring the phone to school, it should be in the locker. And
Right.
so if there was shooting, you know, that would follow that they're not going to be running to their locker to get their phone anyways. So
Yeah. When you get into the nuances of it, it doesn't quite make sense, these arguments. But um, yeah, I loved what you shared today about like the dopamine hits because I think it can be so detrimental to even if it's in their locker. Now they're sitting in class, they're not paying attention because they cannot wait to get to their locker to check who's texted them back or how many comments they got on their last Instagram post or Snapchat. So
yeah.
it's anyways. Okay, so we talked about phones. Let's briefly talk about Okay, I have an issue with this. So, when should children have social media is my question. But for me, I feel like never. I feel like I don't, I feel like the only reason I use it is to promote this message and get people to listen to these interviews and learn more about this. Um, but I can't responsibly recommend that my children ever get social media. I don't, for me, it's never added anything to even my adult life that I could have gone without. And in fact, it sort of made me like more frustrated. It wasted my time. Um, so just throwing my stance out there that I think you need to teach your kids what social media is, and that it may be something it's going to look very different by the time our children are older. But I think you need to be responsible in teaching them about what social media is. But if someone were to ask me what age my children should have social media, I'm going to say not ever.
Yeah. Very reasonable
Yeah,
answer.
sure. So what do you think about it?
Um, yeah, I don't know if you saw the post that I did about it. I felt like I wanted to put something out there because obviously people do ask, and I wanted to give like a tangible answer that parents could run through. And I guess I'll go through it and then
Mhm.
maybe tell you why I also think, in a general sense, that it's exactly what you're saying.
Mhm.
Um, so I came up with these 4 R's. So responsible, respectful, resilient, and risk aware.
Mhm.
So responsible would be, are they going to school regularly, or are they skipping class? Are they putting forth their best effort? Can you trust them at home alone, maybe with a younger sibling? Do they do their homework and their chores without a big fight? These kind of basic things.
Mhm.
And respectful would be, do they respect you and your household rules, or do they talk back a lot? Do they break rules a lot, sneak around? Do they respect their siblings, their teachers? How do they interact with their friends? Because if they already have a lot of friend drama without social media, that's just going to escalate when they get it.
Mhm.
Um, Resilient, I think this is the last two really set apart the younger kids from older kids. Um, Resilient is really, do they have a sense of self or a sense of who they are? Do they have strong morals and values that they could defend? I think the most at risk kids for harm from social media are going to be those kids that have pre-existing already
Right.
mental health struggles, right? And so again, social media is a lot worse. So this sense of self, which, as you say, like, I really don't think most kids or teenagers have a really well-rounded sense of who they are. They're part of being a teenager and an adolescent is experimenting and being influenced by others and trying out different things.
Mhm.
So, I do say 16 plus, but I think that most kids are probably not ready at 16. But I also realize that parents want to be able to give them exposure before they leave the house. So there's that whole thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then risk aware. So have you sat down and talked to your kids about the risks, including cyberbullying, predators, sextortion, AI, all these things?
Yep.
And could they write an essay about it? Like, do they have not only an understanding of what it is, but like a true appreciation and an ability to put themselves in that perspective to see how it could harm them or someone they love? I think
Mhm.
run through those things, kids are definitely not ready.
Mhm. Agree.
16. There are rare, very, very responsible kids who will be just fine.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's super helpful. And I did see that Instagram post, and I'm gonna share it so that people can get that snapshot. And I feel like that's the most realistic way that I've seen to look at it. um, I want to talk at the end here a bit about adult or parent social media use. So, can you share your experience personally on how you've used social media yourself, like in adulthood, and what that journey looks like?
Like my personal use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I have a small personal account with maybe like 300 followers of people that I know. I try to go through it regularly and get
Mhm.
people that don't really add anything. I don't post a lot. I'll sometimes post some pictures of my kids or family here and there, but I am doing that less since getting to know Sarah. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, Sarah with Mom Uncharted. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So there's that. I scroll here and there, but I find like I'll spend 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. I think my biggest thing is um, checking, especially now that I have this account. Like this account has been really good in the sense that I feel like I'm contributing positive things. But that pull to sort of check who's engaging is there. So
Yeah.
I'm working on um, picking up less. I saw the thing you posted about, was it 70 times or something in the
Mhm.
day? Hey, that's really useful. I use my phone mostly to text friends.
Mhm.
Um, like me and my best friend text all day, and we're just really close and we talk all the
Yeah,
time.
that's awesome.
But yeah, I think social media for me is okay. It's a problem in our household with my husband because he loves to watch videos and
Mhm.
kind of things. So I'm always like, get off your phone in front of the kids.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. And
Yeah,
my husband has personal Instagram, and he doesn't post anything himself, but he just
he,
has curated his feed to, woodworking and whatever else he's interested in.
my
Eh,
work by
Oh, wow, cool. Yeah,
yeah,
he's in construction management. But he was in the military too, so he's follows some that kind of stuff. I don't know, but and he had also struggles with like adult onset ADHD. Probably had it when he was young too, and I feel like it just helps like manage his scattered thoughts too. But yeah, that like having it out in front of the kids, and I struggle with it too, and checking the notifications um, has been interesting. A lot of people will say, "Don't read the comments," because I will get comments like, "Get a job, Karen," or things like
yeah.
that. I'm
And
like,
I would not. I know. I worry about that with my like. I wouldn't cope well with the
mm.
trolls. I think.
Yeah, especially when I'm posting a little bit more controversial stuff, or a lot of it comes through. Well, that's a whole other discussion on my like gaming topic, but
Yes, I'm interested in that.
yeah, we'll have to save that for another time because I feel like I could go on and on about it. But there's that. But I have to read the comments because I need to know what parents are struggling with. And just today, there was a mom that shared her daughter briefly. Her daughter doesn't have social media, and her friends for a school project were going to create a group chat on Snapchat. And she was like, "Well, I don't have Snapchat." And they went ahead and created the group without her. And her mom basically told her, if you are strong enough to say, I don't have Snapchat, then you should also say, hey, let's do it on a regular text group, and
Right.
she's the mom's staying strong on it. And I said, thank you so much for sharing that. Because I think so many parents give in to the social media question because their kids are left out. And when it comes to a school project, like, do we really need to be doing schoolwork on social media platforms? I don't think so.
Well, and I think again, if parents understood the data
Hmm.
about FOMO and loneliness, like they would realize that you might give in with good intention about the peer pressure, but the studies would show that then once they start using it for over 2 hours a day, they're more lonely than they were before. So it's not necessarily a fix.
Isn't that crazy that a set of platforms that was supposed to make you feel more connected actually makes you feel more lonely?
Yeah, but
That's sad.
you can it's the comparison, right? Like
Hmm.
constantly comparing yourself to other people. It's
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Okay, so let's end off here with a question. So if you had to narrow it down to one most important message for parents from you, so what's the number one thing you would want parents to think more about or to implement? Anything related to social media or screens?
Um, I would say so. There's this idea in medicine of primary versus secondary prevention. So, primary prevention would be preventing a harm from occurring in the first place, like um, eating healthy and exercising to prevent a heart attack. And then secondary prevention would be someone's already had a heart attack, and now we're taking some medications to try to prevent another heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
I think that social media really falls well into this idea of, before you give a child a smartphone, you're really preventing harm or doing primary prevention. And as soon as you hand over that device, no matter how great your intentions are, the restrictions you put on them, it it can get away from you so quickly. And so at that point, you really are looking at harm reduction. And so I would just say to parents, stay with primary prevention as long as you can. I know it's hard, just like it's really hard to eat healthy and exercise,
Mm-hmm.
but your kids will be better off down the road. And I just see, I know you wanted to chat a little bit about specific patients, which I had some stuff. I don't know if we have time, but I see them in my office and I see how much they're struggling, and all these parents wish that they would have waited longer.
Yeah. Why don't you share one of those stories and that can kind of end us off if you have a story
Okay,
about a specific patient.
yeah, let me share. I got permission from a 19-year-old patient of mine to share her story, because it's been a several years long story with her. So she's 19 now. I started seeing her about 4 years ago. So at the time, like, wasn't asking about social media. I really didn't go there. But she
Mm-hmm.
came with anxiety. I think she was grade 10 at the time. Again, a kid who had pre-existing anxiety. I think I'd seen her once, like 5 years prior, when she was just a little girl, for some anxiety. Um, but she came back, was feeling really anxious, and had tried counseling and that kind of thing. So anyways, we put her on medication. She wasn't getting any better. Over the next couple of years, things just got so bad, and her primary complaint became insomnia. So she would come in and she could barely keep her eyes open, and she would say, I just can't sleep. And so I can't stay awake during the day. So then she started feeling depressed, and she was cutting at one point.
Mm-hmm.
She at one point was admitted to psychiatry. She'd seen a couple different psychiatrists. I went back in her chart yesterday to just kind of review things and went through. She, at the age of 19, has been tried on 10 different medications
Oh my God.
for various things: anxiety, depression, at one point ADHD. She'd been put on sleeping pills. She'd been put on pills to keep her awake in the day. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was wild. So she was one of the ones, when I came back from my mat leave, that we dove back into things. And when I started talking to her about her screen time, and we backtracked in time, we realized that when she first started coming to see me in grade 10, it was shortly after she had got a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what really started things off. And then we would look at her screen time together, and she was primarily, because she works a job, she goes to school now, um, she was primarily using her phone all night. And so she was up all night thinking in her mind for so long, like, I'm anxious, I can't sleep. And so this phone is helping me to soothe my anxiety. I'm using it to help myself. But it's actually caused so much difficulty throughout her life. And so, at one point I said, like, I don't think you need medication. I think you need sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're working on that. And she's actually made strides. She started putting her phone outside her bedroom at night, because she's 19 now. So,
Yeah.
reasonably, mom was like, she's got to do this on her own now and figure it out. But I think she's making those connections, and it's helping. But it's just really heartbreaking when you think about, like, how many years she went through and all of the medication and everything else. It's pretty crazy. So she wanted me to put the message out there that, not sleeping, like, really destroyed my sense of well-being and my ability to live in the present moment for so long.
And that it was the phone the whole time, and that no one really thought of that as the root cause and the thing that needed to be put away in order to get on the right track. And parents just need to have, I mean, in the decision to give your kids a phone, think about this. And that's why we should delay. But when your kids get a phone, you really have to teach them these primary rules around how to use it. And that big one is it doesn't go in the bedroom with you when you go to sleep.
Yeah.
I know your parents are probably scrolling on their phones in their bed, and maybe they should stop doing that too. I'm raising my hand. But
Yeah.
like, you are a child with a developing brain that can't put it down. And so there are different rules, and that's okay.
Yes, and there are always different rules for children and parents, and that's just how it is. And we should model it absolutely, but
Mhm.
they they need to have boundaries set early.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that story. It's really beneficial for parents to hear how it's actually affecting kids, because this sharing research and sharing advice and things like that only goes so far. And there are probably parents listening to this that their kids are tired in the daytime or feeling anxious, and maybe we just need to look at their screen time, look at their phone use, and set some better boundaries for them, right?
100%. Yes.
Okay. All right, Dr. Yeung, thank you so much for being here. This was super fun. I really enjoyed learning from you, and I know listeners will too. So, remind listeners where they can connect with you.
So you can find me on Instagram at the Smartphone Effect.
Perfect. Okay, give Dr. Yeung a follow, and I think that's it. So, thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Nikki. This was
Thank
fun.